Hi everyone, my name is Sabrina, and I'm gonna talk about the startup fundamentals today and the importance of the local ecosystem. But first of all, I would like to introduce myself a little bit more. Who am I and what is my background? So as mentioned, my name is Sabrina Wang. I am a community builder at first, then I'm also a founder of a Pre-Accelerator Bootcamp. I'm also an MBA candidate, almost graduating. And I'm also a silly butterfly. That just shows how how playful people should still be, no matter the age or anything. So I'm a very strong believer of creating your own opportunity. So no matter where you are, what you do, you can always change certain destinies and always take opportunity in your hand. Today I'm not going to talk too much about myself. I'm going to talk about the fundamentals of a startup, especially from a China perspective. So I'm going to talk more about the most common mistakes startups do. And I will specify more on China related topics here. But actually, no matter where you are in the world and which startup you have, or where your startup originated, there are some common mistakes that startups do worldwide. So I want you to kind of avoid them if you haven't already made them. I know that I have made a bunch of them when I first started my first startup. So here are just a few avoiding tips to do as a startup. So the common mistake number one is solving a problem you don't care about. So that starts with many misunderstanding of startups in general. So people think that because startup is a trend now, or building a startup, I'll just create a great idea and people will love it. But often it happens that you create an idea that people don't care about. And let's be honest, sometimes you don't even care about that problem that you're trying to solve. Or maybe you think it's a problem, but it's actually not really a problem existing in the world. So let's not start with an idea, but let's start with a problem and make sure that if you're trying to solve this problem, that you are personally invested into it, or make sure at least that other people care about this. The most common mistake number two is choosing co-founders you don't know well. That often happens, and that often happens with, it can be with friends, right? It can be with like even romantic relationships, but especially with co-founders, it often happens as if you would be entering a deep romantic relationship. You can really imagine that as a marriage, and sometimes values don't fit. And especially I've seen that with like foreigners or like international people trying to find a co-founder in China. Often happens that they don't really represent the same values. So if you are trying to find a co-founder in China, make sure that you know that person well. Best case, even maybe you have worked with that person in a few projects, and see where your values are fit. But I'm going to talk about those things a little bit later. So common mistakes number three, not knowing where your first users will come from. So I've seen that many times in China, especially under those international startups that are in China. They often don't really know where the users are coming from. So they target Chinese people and maybe even their end consumers, and don't understand their culture, don't understand their habit, their mentality in certain ways, and maybe even have a language barrier. But they just take this mentality that people in the West have and try to apply it in China. But that often fails. And so you have to identify who are actually your customers. So who are you actually building this product for? Whose problem are you solving? Are those problems really Chinese end consumers, or are those maybe Western, maybe Western consumers that people have in the West? So make sure to identify where those first users, also known as early adopters, where do they come from? So I have seen startups by a Belgian founder in China who actually thought that he's building his product for Chinese people, but then ended up seeing that his market and his customer space is much bigger in the US. So he is located in China, but his main customers are in the US. So that can happen too. And common mistake number 4 is not launching. So from my personal story of my first startup is that I have taken like 6 months at least to launch my own website, because I wanted it to be perfect with my team. We were building and building and building. We knew, oh, people will love it. We were just taking assumptions like crazy, and we didn't even launch our simple website. And it took us 6 months to actually launch the first version, and we expected thousands of people looking at it at once, but of course nobody cares. So remember that when you build a product, launch it. All right, launch it as soon as possible. Building an MVP, I will talk about it later again too, but make sure that you launch, get feedback, collect data, check if the customers that you were thinking about are actually your customers. So launching is actually very important, and stop perfectionism, because this is something you can definitely forget when you're having a startup. And then last but not least of the common mistakes are wrong prioritization. And that is I think this is just one of those many mistakes startups do, are to think that, well, let's focus on fundraising. Without a proper team, without a proper product, haven't even launched their product yet, and haven't validated the product market fit, and trying to get funding. I'm not saying that you can't get it, but with a wrong prioritization, it will lead to our more likely possible failure. And so make sure that you prioritize what is important at that stage that you are in, and set your goals straight. So why am I talking about all those common mistakes? Are basically to give you a better overview of what are those fundamentals a startup should have. As my sharing will be from the perspective of China, I'm also going to talk a little bit about setting up a company in China. And so the fundamentals of a startup starts from a problem identification, goes further to the next step of finding a co-founder that is right for you, building a solution that is solving a problem, and of course what we talked about, building and launching an MVP, and then set up a company in China, and then talking about fundraising. So I would like to start first with problem identification. How do I evaluate my startup idea? So let's start with a problem. Because as mentioned, people might think, well, I have a great idea. Let's say AI is a very trendy topic right now. And people think, let's do AI app that solves a problem nobody wants. So definitely start with a problem that is existing and have a personal connection to it. So check if you personally are if you are actually trying to solve this problem, see if the problem that are you having, maybe other people also have, or maybe you identify a problem that is, in your environment or in the world that you would like to solve, and then you're personally very invested into it. And then also what's important is, what is your unique position? So if you have identified a problem, what is your unique position to actually solve it? Are you maybe very skillful in that area? Maybe you have, decades of expertise in this area to solve a certain problem, or maybe you have the right resources, you know the right people. So always question also, what makes you more unique to solve this problem, and what are those alternative options? How are you going to be better than the competition? So that is regarding the unique position that you must have to solve a certain problem. And then we answer also the question, what is actually a good problem? Because often we might have an idea, right, as mentioned, and that is actually not really solving a problem. So search for problems that are frequent and acute, and then it will be more likely to happen that you're actually solving a problem people care about. So now we talked about problem identification. Let's talk about co-founders now, and how do I find the right co-founder? So I created this checklist. And so let's say if you are during COVID times and you are looking for a co-founder in China, especially if you're trying to enter the Chinese market, it's better to have a co-founder that is, or like, yeah, let's say a co-founder of very, that is Chinese. So because that person will help you to overcome a certain language barrier, that person will understand the local market better. So it's essential if you're at a very early stage, especially. If not, then maybe you can employ certain local Chinese people from here. But if you're looking for a co-founder in China, then make those certain checklists. How do they handle stress? Startups are very stressful. And so it's very important that you understand how they handle stress. And to the second point, how will they help you to handle stress? Because often you will get into clashes, things won't go the way you want it to go. So stress is a fixed fundamental element that will happen in this startup. And so you will need to know how that person handles it and how that person will help you to handle certain things. And then what are their goals and values? And I've mentioned that in those most common mistakes are that sometimes you have certain goals that are not the same goals or values that your co-founder has. And it happens especially if you have different cultural backgrounds. So let's say you're trying to build a startup that grows slowly, that maybe generates revenue in a proper way and in an organic way, and then you're happy if it just grows every year by year a little bit. But maybe your co-founder in China is trying to see, okay, no, I want to work like crazy in the first 3 years. I want to, by the third year, I want to sell my company to another bigger company, and maybe I want to gain certain investments. So I will work like crazy, and it's about money for me. So it's very different goals and values. So make sure that you guys are aligned in advance and be transparent. Communication is the key here. Then last thing on the checklist are complementary skills. The best partnerships are those where you have complementary skills. Let's say you are very good in sales, you're very good in building relationships, maintaining them, and just more strategic in working with people and in the business. And then you have a counterpartner from China who's very good with certain data, or who's very good in understanding the local market, right? Or on a financial background. So make sure that you have very complementary skills when choosing the right co-founder. So now we're gonna get to part 3, which is building a solution and how do I build and launch my MVP. So in order to build a solution that is actually solving a problem that we talked about before, you will need to know who are your target customers. In that case, create a certain persona. You create a persona about the target customer that you think you have. That's why it's maybe sometimes better if you are yourself, for example, your target customers, or you have people in your surroundings who are your target customers, so that you can put yourself into them and try to connect with them better and better assume what kind of problems they have. Then check what underserved needs those target customers have. In those cases, better create a customer persona and then check those things. What are those needs? Why are they underserved right now? Because you need to know what are those current solutions that they're not happy with. So maybe there are certain current solutions from your certain competitors that are being offered, but they are just underserved and they are not really the best way. And you have, with a unique position, you know how to solve those problems of your target customers. So once you have done that, test your solution, all right? And that way, launch your MVP. So an MVP is a minimum viable product, which is the lowest effort version of your product. So on the left side, you can see the Lean Startup Cycle. I can only recommend that Lean Startup book to anyone who is doing a startup. to learn how to do the lean startup process in order to like have an idea, building this idea, and then building a product out of it, and then measure it. Like by measuring, you have to launch it, right? And then get some customer feedback. By customer feedback, you get the data, and with the data, you learn, you improve, and then you launch it again, create a better idea. So it's just basically this loop. And what you can do here is basically, if you're trying to build this super fancy app, let's say, and you're trying to say, okay, I want to know the organic food. I want to create an app that tells me the organic restaurants nearby. Maybe you can start with a QR code. So the minimum viable product is, for example, by creating a QR code where you will then, when people are scanning this QR code, they will get a list of organic restaurants nearby. And that is like a very low effort version of your product before building this super fancy app and not knowing if your customer are actually needing it. So here, test your solution. So now we come to the fourth part of fundamentals, is setting up a company. And often I get to ask, how do I register my startup in China? And what is the process? So simply the process looks like this. So the most common entity type of foreign entrepreneurs are wholly foreign-owned entrepreneur enterprises. So this is also called WOFE. And there are also other types of entities that you can register your company to. That is just the most common one. And then what you will approximately need are like 2 months for registration process and around 10,000 RMB. And the registration process will look like this. So you will be able to register your business name also online since March this year. Then you will get a business license. With this business license, you can issue certain fapiaos, meaning certain bills and everything to cover your costs. And then also a corporate bank account. So with this, you can get then a corporate bank account. So those are those very generic, in a very overview way, how to register your company in China. Other things that you can actually do is maybe talk to certain agencies. What I've seen also often happens in China are very supportive incubators. They're often government owned, and then they will support you with the registration process and can also help you with a visa. So in China, especially if you don't have a visa, or like it's very hard for you to stay here, so or basically impossible. So a visa, if you have your own startup in China, is the entrepreneurship visa that fits to you, and you would get it, and you can actually extend it for 1 year. So in total, you have a visa duration of 2 years for your startup. Now I would actually like to talk a little bit about entering a new market or a new ecosystem. And this is more specific to China. So let's say you're a startup and you're thinking about entering Chinese market, or more specifically, you basically are entering a new ecosystem. So maybe you have, well, a good network in, let's say, Germany, but you're now in China and things might work a little bit different, or maybe there are other key players in that ecosystem. So who are the key players in the ecosystem in China? So as I have also come here with my startup, and I were looking for supporters, the key player in the ecosystem, I can share from my perspective who are the key players here and who you can get closer to, who will give you the necessary support. So there are universities. So as I am doing my MBA at Peking University, I've known that the university itself also has certain incubators, or like they support you if you're a startup, and they will give you certain resources, mentors, or other things to give you like a kickoff start. So those are universities. Sometimes they even invest in your university. They probably come also from more on a angel investor perspective. So maybe sometimes they're professors. I've heard about those cases in China too, where certain professors were very keen about you and your startup, and they started investing in you. Then there are accelerators and venture capitals who will offer you certain programs. Usually they are like 3 to 6 months, and then they're trying to help you to accelerate your startup. So, but this and then they will eventually invest in your startup. So one of the most well known here in China are China Accelerator and some other venture capitalists, SOSV. And so those are the ones that are very well known here in China. And yeah, they can definitely invest in you, give you the necessary support and resources and also knowledge. However, to enter those accelerators, you will need to be more matured. So you will already have to found product market fit. And then, of course, you have government support. So what government will do, there are certain certain funds that they have, so that they can help you finance. They're often organized startup competition by the government. So in China, there's this most common misunderstanding about the ecosystem in China is that they don't have anything supportive or resources for international startups, which is very, very wrong. Maybe now during COVID times, it's a little bit hard to actually bring your startup here to China, but they're still strongly investing into more mature startups, also if they're international, and governments are very welcoming international startups. Then you have incubators and corporates. So you have sometimes, I think maybe you know them like Daimler, Mercedes, and other big brand corporates that also have an internal incubator to grow startups or use certain startup methodologies to improve their product launch. So that also happens, and sometimes corporates are very interested in certain, let's say the automotive corporate, they is very interested in automotive startups. So that one you can also look into. And last but not least, I want to talk about communities and nonprofit organizations. I would say my strongest personal connection are with communities and nonprofit organizations, because not only do you enter a community that is helping you for free, but also you'll find friends, and those friends can open more doors for you and help you to get into accelerators, connect you with venture capitals, refer you to governmental organizations and other funds, and of course incubators too. So I would like to dig a little bit deeper into communities and nonprofit organization. As my background myself, I'm also co-director of StartupYard, but I do want to tell you that when I started to come to China, and I'm living in Beijing, and when I came here, I did not know about anything about the ecosystem. So for me personally, it helped me a lot to join the StartupYard's events, where they share a lot about what they're doing. They're very proactive in holding events, supporting startups, for no money in return, basically, but because they're passionate about startups and they genuinely want to help them. They often organize certain workshops or events or promotional actions for startups. So that's why I'd like to share a little bit about StartupYard in China, as StartupYard itself is the world's largest startup community. You can check, they're all over the world. You can check online a lot about them. StartupYard in Beijing, we have had over 5,000 attendees, over 130 plus by now events. Yeah, so why am I talking about StartupYard? It's basically that if you're a startup and you want to enter any kind of ecosystem, let's say the Chinese one, but maybe also the German one, or the one or someone in the US, you can find their own chapter in your ecosystem. So because StartupYard is so widespread, they have chapters around 600 in 125 plus countries, and reach out to them because they're usually very responsive and will be happy to actually help you. And yeah, I can just tell you that every entrepreneur needs a certain community to support, because here you can share failure, success stories, you can exchange resources, you can find mentors, you can build connections, and you can find like-minded people. So this is my sharing for today. Thank you very much, Cinephyte, for inviting me. If you're interested in knowing more about the Chinese ecosystem, I'm happy to share more details with you if you want to be connected to certain resources in China or certain other organizations that might help your startup. I'm happy to also support you here, not only by Startup Brian, but also my own venture StartupYard. And just as a person myself too, I'm a volunteer, so I'm always happy to help founders. And I'm happy if you can just add me or anything, and then we can follow up the chat later. So thank you and see you soon, hopefully.